but
Okay.
I get where you're going to. Yeah, it's a lot of, you know, you're an artist and you're painting Jesus, and Jesus is a white guy, and you know, how did that happen? So
Yeah, and I mean, you have to really look at these perceptions of divinity, right? Like like how do we, where our consciousness comes from, and how we can justify various things, and we've justified really awful acts such as slavery through this kind of uh, distortion of religiosity. You know, a lot of people have used it as a tool to oppress. But I'm really interested in the transcendental nature of any religious text, not just Christianity. The reason I'm interested in Christianity is because it's my home religion. It's what I was raised with. But I'm very confused by it. I love it, and I don't believe a word of it. You know, there's just so much of it that I inherited that I despise and I disagree with, and yet it's part of who I am. And so weirdly, that's why I went towards the figure, because I had to be able to use this tool of figuration to unpack the history of depictions of the scenes from the life of Christ. At least that's what I was going into graduate school with, this idea. I wanted to find why feminine depictions of the divine were so repulsive, and why the female body was considered sinful, and why sexuality was considered sinful, and why there was a heaven and a hell, and a, you know, you're good, you're bad, this binary, right? Where did that come from, and where and how did we arrive at the sense that, you know, we need the church to get to God? So that was that sort of was the premise and the diving in point for my going towards the figure. It was to understand my own history, right, and my own religion. But then I did a whole project, and I'll try and summarize it very quickly. I worked with this scholar, Elaine Pagels, at Princeton University. I would just take the train to Princeton, and she very generously let me audit her classes for a couple of years in a row. And I very much worked directly from her writing and from Karen King's writing on the Gospel of Mary, and explored ideas around feminine depictions of the divine, which in the early days of Christianity, there was a diversity of perspectives and Christianities, and there were all these things. So by kind of delving into these different explorations, scholarly explorations, I got to this root of my own religious heritage. But
well,
then I did this big project at Columbia University with a bunch of artists, and put on this whole thing with another scholar, or a scholar by the name of Annette Yoshiko Reed, and we put on a symposium and public forum at Columbia. It's the Cathedral of St. John the Divine and Union Theological Seminary. But I brought in, you know, some well-known artists. Some of the artists I brought in are now really famous, which I feel very proud of, that I kind of curated that.
nice.
But all the while I was doing caricatures, by the way, and
Oh, wow.
kind of hiding it, kind of dividing up these two worlds, like embarrassed by the fact that I had to go out on the weekends to street festivals to draw caricatures while I had this fine art career, and while I was trying to sort of break into the art world. And in a way, I look back at that time and it's like, well, there was a kind of aspect of it, because I was in New York City and I really kind of drank that poison about, like, you know, making it big and getting famous and trying to make it and all that stuff. And I decided that, you know, in a way I was kind of pimping out God, you know, like trying to kind of, you know, make these works that were going to sell in the art world, and blah, 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 and it never worked. It was not whatever happened. But I got really sick of religion after that, and I went right into these like scientific explorations around origin, evolution, and the body. But all the while I was drawing caricatures, and I'd done this sort of live drawing right at street festivals where I had did this very active act of drawing people's faces. And then it occurred to me that that action, that line making action, was kind of a privilege of the experience, that sort of ephemeral experience of the performative experience of creating that with people surrounding me, was a performance. And I went towards performance art and did a lot of live drawing. But that line that I learned how to create doing caricatures, I recreated on a kind of various performance settings. So that was a long-winded answer. You probably don't want to get through all those questions because I just really answered too much.
Content's king, remember that.
Yeah.
But we have one of your pictures up now that I am confined in, that we're looking. And when I'm just going to freestyle now. When I look at your work, when I first looked at it, of course, I said, I'm seeing influences of Bali or Terence Bosch, and of course, that's like almost a knee-jerk thing. What would you say are the driving forces of your images right now? Are there influences, or is it your life experiences coming into it?
I mean, presently, I'm in this cartographic, is that the right word? I'm really interested in drawing the earth and drawing water and painting the images of the earth. Mm-hmm. But it swings back, the pendulum swings back to the figure. In terms of influences, I mean, I think there's an accessibility that Dali excites in sort of the public imagination in terms of distortion of form, but still form that you can recognize.
Right.
And I think Bosch, I think the sort of hell landscape that I think you probably found in my work is probably why you see Hieronymus Bosch. So I take that as a complete compliment.
Well, good.
In my early years, I very much looked to early Renaissance and Mannerist influences. I was very influenced by Piero della Francesca, and I was also very influenced by early sort of Gothic, late Gothic, medieval altarpiece pieces, because they were just these conglomerations of just some really gnarly images, right? Of, anyway, those were sort of early influences. I pulled more later towards Mannerist painters like Pontormo. I mean, everyone thinks of, when you think of, nobody really, in the popular imagination, people don't really think of early Renaissance artists particularly, but everybody knows Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, right? So, I mean, I was crying at the Sistine Chapel when I saw it for the first time, and I can be brought to tears if I'm in front of a Michelangelo drawing because of the hatch mark, the line, and the
sensitivity.
It's like God. It's just religion, right? It's just like everything when you see Michelangelo and in real life, you just can't even believe it's possible. But I have this great affinity towards the manners that came right after the High Renaissance, particularly Pontormo, because he really stretched the figure and distorted the figure. So here I was drawing caricatures, distorting the figure, making these like bobble-headed people with little tiny bodies and giant heads, and doing all these crazy things like playing soccer and a baseball and just, drawing, But then in my fine art life, I was using referring to these this distortion of form with the Mannerist painters, but I'm not really good at super high rendered form in painting. I get really over heavy handed with the paint,
right?
So it becomes just thick, and I mean, I think with paint quality, I'm more influenced by Turner, who did these beautiful seascape landscapes. And so those are my, early kind of art historical references that I often think about. Contemporary artists wise. I think a lot about Basquiat because of his incredible line quality. And I think of a lot of different painters at different times, and I think of different performance artists at different times. It just depends on where my head is in terms of what I'm creating. But I think a lot, to be honest, above all of the artists I think of, I am way more kind of a news junkie. So more than thinking constantly about what an artist was doing, like I think about Ana Mendieta, who's a performance artist and one of the sort of great not early, but like recent history. She really invented this performance and landscape thing that I do with some of my work. But I think about her a lot in ways, but on a daily basis when I work, I'm listening constantly to the news.
Well,
so
and of
that
course,
has the biggest influence.
yeah, and of course, you have a body of work now. So whatever influences you have, it's you are influencing you. It's you've got a briefcase of skills that's being filtered through the Sarah Olson machine, or the influences of the fine art are being filtered through the Sarah Olson machine. So, with that in mind, just going back to comics a moment, as I look back at the 40 years that I was collecting, I always noticed comics got bettered when the artist would pull from outside. Bill Sienkiewicz, he went to a point where he was being influenced by Ralph Steadman and Bob Peak. Adam Hughes was clearly doing a Mucha riff on his painting, and Howard Chaykin made typography part of the images in a very it was graphic design more than comics. So with that in mind, if you ever picked up a comic book and saw images that was being influenced by you, how would you feel about that? How would that make you feel if you saw someone being, working your aesthetic into the narrative?
Yeah, I would be very flattered. In fact, I'm working on a book. It's been a long-term project, unfortunately, but it's not a comic book, but it's a book I'm working on with my mother about a dragon. And I've looked a lot at, illustrators, and it's about a baby dragon who falls through the sky and lands in the medieval fishing village, which is modeled after the fishing village where my mom lives in Cornwall, England, with my stepfather. So I've looked at a lot of illustration in that, and also I've looked at a lot of children's books because I have kids. So I've read and reread and read and reread and then read again. And you just have to read those things. So you're looking so thoroughly at those images, even if they kind of suck because your child likes the book. Right. But I don't know as many of I'm not as plugged into the comic book industry artist network. My husband actually is way more plugged into that than I am. He actually knows, you should talk to him too, because he knows a bunch of them. Because he actually obsessively read those when he was a teenage boy and still reads them today. But I look at those illustrations and it's like, damn, these are just off the hook. The line, the hatching, the creation of space, the distortion of space, the using perspective and extending perspective. I mean, it's a real foreshortening, all that foreshortening, and all. It's incredible. And I when I try and illustrate for real, like with the illustration or when I was doing it with caricatures, I'm, just riding by the seat of my pants, just barely able to hold on because it's hard work. So I have full respect.
Well, as we're coming to the end, they say in the arts, if you go to a museum, you're supposed to look at the piece on the wall and you will have an emotional response. You're not supposed to say what you're supposed to feel, but can you talk at all about any of your feelings or your motives or your intentions with the piece we have up now, this painted piece? If I could start off myself, I like it for myself because it seems equal parts suffering and beauty, and I see creation there and I see destruction, and it's sort of a Rorschach piece in that depending on the person, different people are going to see parts of it being ugly, and different people are going to see parts of it beautiful. Some parts are going to come off as destructive, and some parts as creation.
Mm-hmm.
What was your thoughts as you were putting this piece together?
I had a series of drawings that I had done, and they are part of this piece, but you can't see them unless I can maybe send you some of the details if you want to add those.
Mm-hmm.
But that image started with some really random, just out of my head drawing, and I call the piece Mom Rising, and I did a series of images based on a Gnostic text. I refer back to the religion, the early Christianity images that I sort of was exploring. I was very moved by this whole story, this parable about the rise of the soul, and it was very much about how you can ascend through your own consciousness. So I had made a bunch of those rise images, but that piece I made later, the piece that you have up, and it was more around motherhood. It was more around having children, having less time to just focus in on the work, feeling very random and displaced in my head and in my work. And, it was kind of like Phoenix rising from the ashes, like Mom rising out of the ashes of motherhood, right?
Yeah.
I like it because it bridges a few different bodies of work that I'm working on now. There's the figuration component, but there's also the line that we've talked about that is really crucial. And if I could say one thing about line, because you mentioned it earlier, I had for a while a very antagonistic relationship with oil paint after my graduate school experience, because I didn't excel at the New York Academy of Art as being like one of the top painters that came out of there, able to render form perfectly and beautifully and paint in this very 18th century neoclassical way. I basically sucked at all of that. Like, that was not where I excelled. But after doing caricatures and after just drawing and drawing and drawing, and it kind of pulling myself away from oil paint, I realized that my true harmony is what I find when I can just hatch, and the image comes out of the hatching.
Yeah.
It's like a hatching, and
almost like sculpting.
It is.
You take all the rock away that isn't elephant, and you have elephant.
Yeah, and in terms of people responding to the work, I think every answer is you see the work from your life perspective. So that's the beauty of art, right? You can come to any piece of art. Anybody can come to any piece of art, and the art should take them to a place, and you shouldn't need the artist to tell you what it's about. If the artist does tell you what it's about and that helps you experience it better, then I think that all the better. But I always feel like the art is the primary vehicle to take the work, take the viewer to a place. So.
Very cool. Well, I had these other questions, but you've kind of on your own organically touched on them, like things you're working on now. But so to start wrapping this up, I know artists evolve over time. The artist you are now is not the same artist you were at 25 or any other time. So could you, in one sentence, state your mission statement as an artist right now?
Oh gosh. One statement, one sentence. I am trying to see the world from unconventional perspectives. Can I grab a painting?
Sure.
You can't see it. I just dropped a painting. Shit. Sorry, I just swore now on your podcast. There's Africa.
Oh.
It's upside down and it's disorienting. And I think that presently I'm the most interested in understanding our true origin. We all originate from Africa.
True.
As human beings, and I'm interested in human migration and how we have come together as a species and why we have become divided. And I'm interested in charting those migratory paths in order to illuminate our present configuration of just injustice that we are looking at in America. Okay, this is not a sentence, but I'm going to say it anyway. After the death of George Floyd, it became everybody's job to wake up and smell the to see and smell and look and understand what America really is. History is the lie agreed upon, correct? So it's time to unearth the lie. It's time to dissect it. And that's what my work is about right now, is dissecting the lie and finding our own history, our true history.
History is written by the victors, yes, unfortunately. All right. So, well, as we're coming to the end, the warden is telling me the visiting hours is coming up, and they're going to have to move me to another cell or another page.
Are you going to cover the prison industrial complex?
Maybe.
You better.
You should.
You better. That's your job now in this time.
Through metaphor, right?
Yeah.
So, well, as we end up, so where can the people find you? They're looking for works by Sarah Olson.
That is a very good question, because I'm a little all over the place right now. I have a website that is a little behind, but it still gets you through a lot of bodies of work at Sarah-Olson, Olson, Sarah with an H, SARAH -Olson, OLSON.com. My most current and constant posting place is Instagram at Olson Elizabeth Sarah. I devised my handle before I understood that it should be short and not long. But we can link this up with those. Those are probably the most current. I also have a Facebook page, which is a little hit and miss, but it does exist. And yeah, I'm doing different projects, doing a lot of painting. I've been a little out of the social media loop lately because I'm just trying to absorb a lot of information, but it's all coming at you there in those places. So
okay, well look, we're going to put those links in the video description so people don't have to transcribe anything. You just click on the links. And look, I want to thank you again for giving me your time today and your insights and your thoughts. It was very this episode, as I say, is the path of the artist, and our Venn diagram intersected one time, and we kind of talked about that here, and then we went on further with where you're at now. And if it's not too depressing, we hope you'll visit the paper prison again and alleviate the solitary.
Yes.
So thank you, Ms. Olson. You have good.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
The best to you. And as I've said, please out there remember, 4 walls do not a prison make, but comics can be a very cool prison. Take care now. Bye-bye.